Critical race theory is Marxism. Make no mistake, those defending it are Marxists. Who am I talking about tonight? I'm talking about former Virginia governor and current candidate for governor, Terry McAuliffe, who answered a question about critical race theory while on the campaign trail, calling parental concerns about critical race theory being taught in public schools a conspiracy theory. Take a look.
So I, listen to what you're saying about education. I was just wondering, with all the Republicans are talking about critical race theory, and they're making this huge deal about it, and it's all the conversation in the news with Virginia. What are you going to say to all those people making education about that?
That's another right-wing conspiracy. Okay. This is totally made up by Donald Trump and Glenn Youngkin. This is who they are. It's a conspiracy theory.
A conspiracy theory, he says. Well, if the left says it's conspiracy theory, you can be pretty sure it's probably true, and they definitely don't want you to know about it. Terry McAuliffe, radical leftist, is not the only one on the left trying to camouflage the reality of the Marxist critical race theory. The ACLU also says the Republican Party, the GOP, wants to ban talking about racism in school. This is their quote. They're talking about critical race theory, of course. They say, quote, "A nationwide attempt to censor discussion of race in the classroom is underway. In recent weeks, Republican lawmakers across the country have proposed bills banning teaching divisive concepts in K-12 public schools and in public colleges and universities. The new bills target efforts to provide education about gender and race discrimination, including critical race theory, an academic concept and practice that recognizes systemic racism, is deeply ingrained in American society, and examines how our systems promote inequality. Now, state lawmakers are attempting to use these bills to bar educators from teaching critical race theory and related concepts like white privilege and racial equity in schools. These bills don't just set back progress in addressing systemic issues, they also rob young people of an inclusive education and blatantly suppress speech about race." End quote. Again, make no mistake, critical race theory is racist. Of course it is. It teaches everyone to look at other people and other things, everything, through the prism of race. But it's not just racialism. It's actually Marxism. If you travel back to the founding of critical race theory, that's what you'll find. It's actually not a theory at all. It's not a perspective on history, like the ACLU says. It's certainly not a conspiracy theory of the right wing. It might be a conspiracy of the left because it's Marxism. So let's take a look at the founding of critical race theory. It was actually founded in the Frankfurt School in Germany. The Frankfurt School, in 1937, the second director of the Frankfurt School, named Max Horkheimer, wrote a manifesto on critical theory. Critical theory is what I would call the grandfather of critical race theory. It went critical theory, critical legal studies, critical race theory. Now, critical theory teaches that there is no such thing as objective truth. No, they say that everything is just a competing political narrative. They're trying to destroy objective truth. They divide everyone into groups of oppressors or oppressed in classic Marxist fashion. Critical theory teaches that the oppressed stand in the way of a Marxist revolution when they adhere to the societal norms and institutions of their so-called oppressors. So, critical theory teaches that these institutions, an impediment to a Marxist revolution, must be destroyed by relentless criticism. Hence the name, critical theory. So by the 1930s, these Marxists at the Frankfurt School realized that Karl Marx's vision of a worker-led revolution wasn't going to happen, right? It simply wasn't happening. So Antonio Gramsci, the founder of the Italian Communist Party, he blamed the workers themselves for this. He said, and he took critical theory one step further, saying that these workers needed to be re-educated. Meanwhile, those at the Frankfurt School had to flee Germany because of the Nazi regime. They found refuge at Columbia University here in the United States. And when they returned to Germany after the fall of the Nazi regime, they left behind in the United States one of their associates, Herbert Marcuse. It was Marcuse who identified a new worker in the Marxist revolution: racial minorities. Now remember, the goal of critical theory and critical race theory was, is, and always has been a Marxist revolution. The racialism, viewing everyone through the prism of race, reducing everyone to their skin color, is just a tactic to tear down American institutions to usher in a Marxist society. Now, this poisonous ideology has infiltrated our society. We know this. It's infiltrated public schools. We've seen parents across the country stand up and speak out and condemn this. In fact, even a survivor of Mao's communist China has warned that critical race theory is communism. Take a look.
I've been very alarmed about what's going on in our school. You are now training our children to be social justice warriors and to loathe our country and our history. Growing up in Mao's China, all this seemed very familiar. The communist regime used the same critical theory to divide people. The only difference is they use class instead of race. During the Cultural Revolution, I witnessed students and teachers turn against each other. We changed school names to be politically correct. We were taught to denounce our heritage. The Red Guards destroy anything that is not communist, old statues, books, and anything else. We are also encouraged to report on each other, just like the Student Equity Ambassador Program and the bias reporting system. This is indeed the American version of the Chinese Cultural Revolution. The critical race theory has its roots in cultural Marxism. It should have no place in our schools.
If that doesn't give you the chills, then I don't know what will. Critical race theory is Marxism, just instead of class, it uses race. And those who would deny it, those who would try to hide it, to camouflage it, to lie to you about it, should be asked the following questions. They should first be asked, can you define critical race theory? What is it? Because oftentimes you'll find they can't answer that. They should be asked, do you think it's racist to judge someone based solely on the color of that person's skin? And if so, isn't critical race theory racist, since that's what it teaches? They should be asked, who was the architect of critical theory, the grandfather of critical race theory? The obvious answer to that is Max Horkheimer, Antonio Gramsci, and Herbert Marcuse. If they can't answer that, that's a problem. Proponents of critical race theory should be asked, what is the goal of critical theory? What is the goal of critical race theory? The answer to that is obviously Marxism, by way of tearing down the social institutions and beliefs adhered to by the so-called oppressed that supposedly prevent them from revolting. Adherents to critical race theory should be asked, can you describe the difference between equality and equity? This is a very serious difference, as equality means equal opportunity and equity means equal outcome, which requires discrimination against someone based on an immutable characteristic. Adherents to critical race theory should be asked, do you believe America is fundamentally good or evil? There's a big difference between saying good with flaws or evil and illegitimate. Now, with me now to discuss this, Congressman Chip Roy from the great state of Texas. Congressman, good to see you, sir.
Liz, great to see you.
Congressman, reacts to Governor McAuliffe saying that critical race theory and parental concerns in public schools is a right-wing conspiracy theory.
Well, do you remember that opening scene in My Cousin Vinny when Joe Pesci's character says to the prosecutor over there, he goes over to the jury, he says, everything that guy just said is BS, except to use the full word. That's my response to Terry McAuliffe. That's my response to Democrats. Look, they're burying their head in the sand because the American people now have seen what's going on in the corrupt public education system. The veil has been lifted. If there's one upside to this ridiculousness of the last year under COVID, a whole nother conversation, it's that the American people have now seen what their kids have been being taught, and they're outraged by it, and properly so. I would ask the governor, I'd ask Terry McAuliffe, if this bothers him or not. In Evanston, Illinois, students listened to Not My Idea, a book about whiteness, which states that whiteness is a bad deal and always was, and that you can be white without signing on to whiteness. In Cupertino, California, third graders were required to deconstruct their radical identities and then rank themselves according to their power and privilege. I could go through a laundry list of these things. We could go over to the fella in Space Force who was fired because he raised issues about critical race theory. Look, this is going on every single day in our schools. It's going on in the bowels of our deep state government. It's going on in the bowels of the Department of Defense. Instead of teaching our military to kill people and blow things up, which is what we want our military to do, they're being, radically indoctrinated with these kinds of theories. I'm glad the veil's been lifted, but now our job is to do something about it. So I introduced legislation to say that not $1 should go to any school, K through graduate school, that teaches any of this garbage. And we're going to be fighting this, and I think this is going to be a central part of what we're campaigning on over the next year and a half.
I certainly hope so, because as I laid out in the monologue, this isn't, I mean, it's racist, and racism is horrific and horrendous enough, but this isn't just racialism. It's racialism used as a tool to usher in a Marxist revolution that is the reality of what critical race theory is. And those who practice it, like the Black Lives Matter movement, for example, the leaders of that movement, Patrice Cullors specifically, admitted they are trained Marxists. They're trained Marxists, and we can see for ourselves that they're trying to tear down institutions like law enforcement and our criminal justice system, in addition to demonizing white people and our country in general. My question to you is this. The other politicos, whether that's Governor McAuliffe, whether that's liberal-leaning members of school boards, are they aware that they're taking part in a Marxist tactic? Are they aware that they are taking part in essentially the start of a Marxist revolution, or are they just ignorant racists? It seems to me it's a binary option.
Well, I think some of them are very much aware, right? I mean, we see this every day in the complete inexplicable positions that they take on border security, watching President Biden go over to Europe and go over to Putin and basically say, oh, sure, here are 16 areas where you can't hit us on cybersecurity, but hey, go ahead and hit us on all the other things. Literally, you can't make up. It's not incompetence, Liz. It can't just be incompetence, right? This has to be more sinister than that, because they are so literally off the mark in endangering our country with wide open borders and empowering cartels and endangering us and empowering Russia and empowering China and siding up with Iran instead of Israel. And now on this stuff, on indoctrinating our children to teach America as evil in order to have control over our kids. That is what this is about. It is about power. It is about control. I suppose there are some of my Democratic colleagues who bury their head in the sand. And let's be honest, there's some of my Republican colleagues who bury their head in the sand and ignore that this is going on. But, there's a reason that so many parents are now leaving their kids out of the public schools after they got them out in the last year and leaving them in homeschooling. And then so many parents that are fleeing and trying to find private schools. And that is why we need to radically change the system to empower parents, have the dollar follow the parent to get our kids out of these corrupt school systems. The footage you're showing, that may be from the Loudoun County public schools. I'm not sure, but I know that there was a terrible incident in Loudoun County. I was a product of that public school system. And I went there when it was rational, insane, and we loved America and we learned history. Liberal, Democrat, Republican, didn't matter. But now they are teaching our children that America is evil. They're teaching our children to believe that you have two mommies, or that, you may not be a boy or a girl, and all of these crazy things that the American people are sick of. And frankly, I'm glad that we now have that veil lifted. And I think there might be a blessing that came out of this absurdity with COVID. The American people now get the joke of what these bureaucrats are doing to them.
Right, because they can actually see how extreme and how radical and how Marxist these beliefs are. And you know what I believe? I believe that the people purporting this or perpetuating this do know what they're doing. I don't believe that there's a lot of people, a lot of Democrats or radical leftists operating in ignorance. I think that they truly believe that Marxism just hasn't been tried by the right person, and that America is fundamentally illegitimate, and that we should tear her down and replace her with a socialist structure. I think that the vast majority of people in the public sphere who are advocating for the Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, AOC, cultural Marxists, Black Lives Matter, all that kind of stuff, I believe that they know what they're doing, and what they're doing is Marxism. It's Republicans who sometimes don't believe that the other side is as nefarious as they truly are. And it's incumbent on us Republicans to actually believe it when the evidence is put forth.
Hey, thanks so much for watching The First on YouTube. If you liked what you saw, go ahead and like and subscribe. You heard me. Like it, subscribe. You'll get a lot more of it and a lot more of me. Thanks.